Summer arrived in Willow Creek with long sunny days and green fields stretching to the horizon. After the harsh winter of the previous year, life finally seemed normal again. Walter Reed liked it that way. At 75 years old, he no longer wished for excitement, just peaceful mornings, a warm cup of coffee, and Max by his side. That was enough. That morning, Walter and Max drove to Turner Ranch, north of town, home to Walter's longtime friend, Jacob Turner. Jacob was a cattle farmer, 62 years old, strong, hardworking, and known for being able to fix almost anything with his own hands. When the pickup truck stopped, Jacob stepped out of the barn. A familiar smile spread across his weathered face. "About time you got here," he laughed. Walter shook his hand, while Max happily explored the yard, sniffing everything in sight. The morning passed with laughter. Walter helped repair livestock pens. The two old friends shared stories, memories from decades earlier, while Max rested beneath a nearby tree, quietly watching. Early that afternoon, Walter prepared to head home before climbing into the truck. Max suddenly turned toward the northern pasture, where the cattle were grazing. His eyes lingered there longer than usual. But then, Walter called, and Max climbed into the truck. After Walter left, Jacob continued working. Part of the northern fence had been damaged during a recent storm. He wanted it repaired before evening. The northern pasture housed the largest bulls on the ranch, including Titan, a massive bull weighing nearly a ton. Powerful, aggressive, and unpredictable. Normally, Jacob was extremely careful around Titan, but today, the animal seemed unusually calm, and that made him careless. Jacob set down his toolbox and began repairing a loose fence post, completely unaware that behind him, Titan had raised his head. Watching his every movement, the bull scraped a hoof against the ground once, then again, sending dirt flying. Jacob continued working, unaware that danger was moving closer with every second. Titan lowered his head, muscles tightening beneath his thick hide, then began moving forward, slowly, heavily, menacingly. And at that moment, no one knew that within minutes, a terrible accident would unfold, and Max would have to do something no one ever expected: stand against a giant bull to save a farmer's life. Jacob Turner continued repairing the fence. His hammer struck the wooden post in a steady rhythm. The sound echoed across the open pasture. Everything seemed perfectly normal until he heard a powerful breath behind him. Jacob turned around, and his heart nearly stopped. Titan stood less than 20 meters away, head lowered, dark eyes locked onto him, its front hooves scraping the ground. Jacob immediately straightened. He recognized that posture. He had seen it before. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't caution. It was aggression. "This isn't good," he muttered, slowly, stepping backward, trying to remain calm, not turning his back, not running. The basic rules every cattle farmer learns. But Titan didn't care. The massive bull took another step, then another. The distance kept shrinking. 15 meters, 10 meters. Jacob felt sweat running down his neck. Even though the day wasn't particularly hot, he looked around. No people nearby, no vehicles, no shelter, only open pasture. Then suddenly, Titan let out a deep, threatening bellow and charged. The ground shook beneath its weight. Jacob turned and ran. He knew he couldn't outrun a bull, but survival instinct gave him no choice. The distance closed rapidly. Jacob could hear the animal breathing behind him, could hear the pounding hooves getting closer every second. He sprinted toward a large tree near the fence. Maybe it was his only chance, but before he could reach it, a powerful impact slammed into his side. Jacob crashed into the grass. His hat flew away. The air was knocked from his lungs. The world spun around him. Titan turned, the bull wasn't finished. It was preparing to charge again. This time, only a few meters away, Jacob tried to stand, but pain shot through his left leg. He stumbled and fell, unable to run, unable to escape. For the first time in years, Jacob felt truly afraid. He looked at Titan, preparing another charge, and realized he was running out of time. At the same moment, back at Reed Farm, Max was resting on the front porch. Suddenly, he jumped to his feet, ears raised, eyes fixed toward the north, toward Turner Ranch. Walter looked up from his newspaper. "What is it?" he asked, but Max didn't respond. The dog stood perfectly still, listening. Then, without warning, Max bolted from the porch, so fast that Walter barely reacted. "Max!" Walter shouted. But the German Shepherd was already racing across the yard, heading straight toward Jacob's ranch. As if he somehow knew someone needed help, Jacob Turner lay on the ground, breathing heavily. Pain spread throughout his body. He tried to stand, but his left leg barely worked. Only a few meters away, Titan turned around. The massive bull lowered its head, preparing another charge. This time, Jacob knew he couldn't escape. He looked around one last time. The vast pasture was completely empty. No one could hear him. No one knew what was happening. Titan began charging. The ground trembled. Each heavy hoofbeat echoed across the field. The distance closed rapidly. Jacob clenched his teeth, preparing for the worst. Then suddenly, a bark shattered the silence. A dark figure raced across the grass, fast as lightning. Jacob's eyes widened, unable to believe what he was seeing. Max, the German Shepherd, sprinted directly into Titan's path. His bark echoed across the pasture. Loud, fearless, determined. Titan hesitated. The giant bull shifted its attention, now focused entirely on Max. Jacob was horrified. "No," he shouted, but it was too late. Max continued barking, stepping back, then forward again, deliberately drawing Titan away from Jacob. The bull became furious. It turned completely toward the dog, head lowered, hooves tearing into the dirt, then charged. Max spun around, running along the fence line, faster than any dog Jacob had ever seen. Titan chased after him, a mountain of muscle racing across the pasture, dirt and grass flying behind. Only a few meters separated them. One mistake, one impact, could seriously injure Max. But the dog wasn't running blindly. He kept changing direction. Left, right, then left again, forcing Titan to constantly adjust. The bull grew angrier, more reckless, completely focused on the dog, exactly as Max intended. Meanwhile, Jacob dragged himself toward the fence, inch by inch, meter by meter. He could hardly believe it. A dog was risking everything to give him a chance to survive. Suddenly, Titan accelerated. Closing the distance, Jacob's heart sank. Max saw it, but instead of running farther away, he suddenly changed direction, racing toward a large haystack near the corner of the pasture. Titan followed instantly, like a runaway train. At the last possible second, Max leaped aside. Titan couldn't stop. The massive bull crashed directly into the haystack. The entire pile shook violently. A few precious seconds appeared. Max immediately turned back, running toward Jacob. By now, Jacob had reached the fence, but he still couldn't stand. Max positioned himself in front of him, fur raised, eyes locked on Titan. In the distance, the giant bull slowly turned around, and this time, it looked even angrier than before. Titan turned around, slowly, but filled with rage. Pieces of hay still clung to its head and shoulders, only making the giant bull angrier. Max stood in front of Jacob, his paws planted firmly in the ground, eyes locked on his opponent. Jacob struggled against the fence. The pain in his leg grew worse. He knew he couldn't run anymore. "Max," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Go." But Max didn't move. Titan stepped forward. 20 meters away. 15. 10. The air seemed frozen. Jacob could feel his heart pounding. Then Titan charged. Faster than before. Stronger than before. Max instantly darted aside, his bark echoing across the pasture. Titan changed direction. Chasing him, Max ran circles around the fence line, trying to keep the bull as far from Jacob as possible. But this time, Titan wasn't fooled so easily. The bull kept cutting corners, closing the distance. Jacob saw it happening. Fear tightened in his chest. Max changed direction again, but the ground ahead sloped slightly. One paw slipped on the soft dirt, just for a moment, but it was enough. Titan surged closer. Jacob held his breath. The bull thundered past, missing Max by inches. Fortunately, the dog managed to leap aside. Titan continued several yards before stopping, turning around, preparing another attack. Back at Reed Farm, Walter began feeling uneasy. He had never seen Max run off like that. Without warning, without coming back, Walter stepped outside, looking north, toward Turner Ranch. A strange feeling settled in his chest. He quickly grabbed his truck keys. "I hope everything's all right," he muttered. The pickup roared to life and headed north. Meanwhile, out in the pasture, Titan charged again. Max continued, trying to distract him, but he was beginning to tire. The speed, the power, the size advantage, none of it favored the dog. Jacob understood that, and it broke his heart. Max could have escaped. He could have saved himself, but he stayed because someone needed help. Titan accelerated. The ground shook violently. This time, the bull wasn't aiming at Max. It suddenly shifted its focus, straight toward Jacob. Jacob froze. He couldn't run, couldn't stand, couldn't do anything. And Titan was charging, faster than ever. At that exact moment, Max spun around and sprinted with everything he had, cutting directly across the bull's path. One moment, one decision, that could change everything. Titan charged toward Jacob like a storm. The distance disappeared in seconds. Jacob tried to stand, but his injured leg refused to cooperate. He knew he couldn't escape. Everything seemed to slow down. The pounding hooves, the heavy breathing, the racing heartbeat in his chest. Then, suddenly, a dark figure appeared. It was Max. The German Shepherd sprinted forward, not away from danger, but straight toward it. Jacob's eyes widened. Max cut directly across Titan's path. His bark echoed across the pasture. The giant bull reacted instinctively, changing direction for a split second. Just one moment, but it was enough. Titan missed Jacob, rushing past him instead. The fence behind him shook violently. Jacob fell backward, but he was alive. Titan turned immediately. Now every bit of its anger was focused on Max. The bull bellowed and charged again. Max took off running, not because he was afraid, but because he knew he had to keep drawing the danger away. Across the pasture, a desperate chase unfolded. Titan thundered through the grass, past fence posts, across uneven ground, while Max constantly changed direction, never allowing the bull to catch him. But gradually, the dog began to tire. He had been running too long, too fast, for too many minutes. Titan kept coming. The distance closed again. 10 meters, 8 meters, 5 meters. Jacob tried to shout, but his throat was dry. He could only watch helplessly. Then, suddenly, an engine roared in the distance. Walter's pickup truck appeared on the dirt road. The moment Walter stepped out, he saw everything. Titan chasing Max. Jacob injured near the fence. My God. Walter ran forward. At the same time, He activated the truck's emergency horn. A loud sound echoed across the pasture. Titan paused. The bull turned toward the truck. For the first time, its attention shifted. Max immediately took advantage, circling behind the animal, barking loudly, keeping a safe distance. Walter quickly called for help, while running toward Jacob. "Jacob!" he shouted. "Are you all right?" Jacob nodded weakly, pain written across his face. Walter knelt beside him, looking at the injured leg. He knew his friend needed help immediately, but Titan was still there, still pacing in the distance, still dangerous. And Max continued watching every movement, never looking away, never giving up. 15 minutes later, the sound of rescue sirens echoed down the dirt road. 2 Willow Creek rescue vehicles entered the pasture. A local veterinarian arrived behind them. Everyone had responded to Walter's emergency call, but none of them were prepared for what they saw. An injured farmer beside a fence, a massive bull still roaming the field, and a German shepherd carefully watching its every move, like a guardian, refusing to let the animal get any closer. One rescuer shook his head. "I've never seen anything like this." Walter remained silent, watching Max. Pride and concern filled his eyes, because he knew one mistake, and the dog could be seriously hurt. The medical team examined Jacob. Fortunately, his injuries were not life-threatening, but his hip and left leg had taken a severe impact. He needed immediate hospital treatment. Jacob tried to sit up. The first thing he asked about wasn't himself. It was Max. "Where's the dog?" Walter pointed toward the pasture. Max was still standing about 20 meters from Titan, watching every movement. Jacob stared at the scene. Emotion caught in his throat. Never in his life had he imagined that a dog would save him. The veterinarian prepared a tranquilizer rifle, but Titan kept moving. The distance was difficult, and a poor shot could make the bull even more dangerous. Everyone had to wait. Meanwhile, Max continued his mission. He didn't attack, didn't provoke, didn't retreat. He simply watched, making sure Titan stayed away. Minutes passed, then more minutes, then half an hour. The tension remained heavy across the pasture. Finally, Titan stopped. The giant bull looked around. Perhaps the anger was fading. Slowly, it began walking toward the far side of the field, away from everyone. The veterinarian seized the opportunity. A tranquilizer dart flew through the air. Titan flinched, walked a little farther, then slowed, and finally collapsed peacefully in the grass. The entire rescue team breathed a sigh of relief. The crisis was finally over, or so they thought. As Jacob was lifted onto the stretcher, he reached out his hand. "Max," he whispered. For the first time since the attack, Max looked away from Titan and trotted over. Jacob placed a trembling hand on the dog's head. His eyes filled with tears. "I owe you my life," he said. Max simply wagged his tail, as if saving a friend was the most natural thing in the world. And for Jacob, it became a moment he would never forget. Willow Creek Hospital wasn't large, but for Jacob Turner, there was nowhere he'd rather be right now. 2 days after the attack, he lay in a hospital bed, his left leg secured, his hip still aching whenever he moved. The doctors told him he was lucky. If the impact had been slightly stronger, or if Titan had struck from a different angle, the outcome could have been much worse. Jacob knew that. He had spent his entire life around cattle. He understood the strength of a mature bull. But the thing he thought about most wasn't Titan. It was Max. Every day, he asked about the dog whenever Walter visited. The first question was always the same. "How's Max?" Walter couldn't help laughing. "You ask about him more than the doctors ask about you." Jacob laughed too, but then fell quiet, because deep down, he knew he wouldn't be here without that dog. On the third afternoon, Walter arrived with Max. The moment the door opened, Max's ears lifted. He saw Jacob, and his tail immediately began wagging. Jacob smiled, one of the few genuine smiles since the accident. "Hello, hero," he said softly. Max trotted straight to the bed, resting his head on the mattress. Jacob gently stroked the familiar black and tan fur. For a few moments, nobody spoke. Yet the room somehow felt warmer. Walter pulled up a chair. "You nearly scared me to death." Jacob laughed. "I think Max handled that job." Walter looked at the dog. "That's probably true." Both men laughed. For the first time since the accident, things felt lighter. Then Jacob looked out the window. His smile slowly faded. Walter noticed immediately. "Something wrong." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Finally he spoke. "I've been thinking about the ranch." Walter listened. "I'm not young anymore," Jacob continued. "If Max hadn't shown up that day," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Both men understood. The accident had forced Jacob to face a difficult truth. He wasn't invincible anymore. Age had finally caught up with him. The conversation continued until sunset. Before Walter left, Jacob called Max over. He opened a drawer beside the bed and pulled out an old rubber ball. It looked like it had been sitting there for years. "I think you've earned this," he said. Max happily took the ball. His eyes lit up like a puppy's. Walter laughed. "Well, now you've officially bribed him." Jacob laughed too. But watching Max enjoy that simple gift made something inside him feel lighter. For the first time since the attack, he wasn't thinking about fear. He was thinking about gratitude. And the second chance he had been given 10 days after the accident. Jacob Turner was finally discharged from the hospital. That morning, Walter came to pick him up. Max sat in the passenger seat, his tail thumping excitedly the moment he saw Jacob walking out. "Hello, hero," Jacob smiled. Max immediately leaned out the window, making several people nearby laugh. But as the truck left town, the smile slowly faded from Jacob's face. He stared out the window. The familiar fields rolled by, the wooden fences, the windmills, the dirt roads he had traveled thousands of times. Everything looked the same, but something had changed. Him, the accident had left behind a fear he didn't want to admit. For more than 40 years, he had believed he was in control. He understood livestock, the land, the seasons. But that day, in just a few seconds, he had nearly lost everything. And what bothered him most was that he couldn't save himself. He needed Max. He needed Walter. He needed the rescue team. For the first time in his life, Jacob truly felt old. When they arrived at the ranch, he stepped out slowly, his cane tapping against the dirt. The barn was still there. The pastures were still there. The cattle were still grazing. Yet coming home didn't bring comfort, only uncertainty. Max stayed close beside him, as if he understood. That afternoon, Jacob sat on the porch, staring toward the pasture where the accident happened. Walter sat beside him. The two men remained silent for a long time. Finally, Jacob spoke. "I've been thinking about selling the herd." Walter turned toward him. He didn't answer immediately, because he knew how much those words meant. The cattle weren't just a business. They were Jacob's life, his legacy, the thing he built after losing his wife. "Why?" Walter asked. Jacob gave a tired smile. "I'm not sure I'm strong enough anymore." The wind moved softly across the fields. Neither man spoke again. That night, Jacob couldn't sleep. He lay awake, listening to the clock ticking, listening to the wind outside, thinking about the future. If he sold the herd, what would he do? If he kept it, could he still manage it? The questions repeated themselves all night long. The next morning, Jacob walked outside with his cane, determined to inspect the pasture himself. Even though the doctors had told him to rest, Max immediately followed, like a shadow. When they reached the northern fence, Jacob stopped. This was where it happened. The rescue tire tracks were still faintly visible. Several fence posts had already been replaced. But the memory remained. Jacob stood there for a long time. Finally, he sighed. "I'm getting old, Max." The dog looked up at him, calm brown eyes. Jacob smiled faintly. "You probably think so too." "Of course." Max said nothing. But then he did something unexpected. He gently grabbed the end of Jacob's cane and tugged it forward. As if encouraging him to keep walking, Jacob laughed out loud. For the first time in days. A genuine laugh. "All right," he said. "Let's keep going." And together, they continued across the pasture, one step at a time. Beneath the Montana sun, Jacob still didn't know what the future held. But for the first time since the accident, he began to believe his story might not be over yet. The following weeks passed slowly. Jacob continued trying to manage the ranch, but things were different now. He walked slower, rested more often, and always carried a cane. He hated that. His entire life. He had been the one helping others, not the one needing help. Now, even repairing a short section of fence took twice as long as before. One morning, Jacob sat inside the small ranch office, papers spread across the desk, livestock records, feed costs, medical expenses, maintenance bills. He stared at them for a long time, then picked up a pen for the first time. He seriously calculated what it would mean to sell the herd. If he sold everything, he could live comfortably for years. No more exhausting days. No more brutal winters. No more risks, like the recent accident. It all sounded reasonable, very reasonable. Yet somehow, it didn't make him feel better. That afternoon, Walter stopped by. The two friends sat on the porch. As they often did, Max lay nearby, chewing on the old rubber ball Jacob had given him. Walter glanced at the paperwork. "You're really thinking about selling?" Jacob remained quiet, then finally answered, "I don't know." Walter nodded. He didn't argue, didn't try to change his mind, because he knew that decision belonged to Jacob alone. That evening, a summer rainstorm rolled across the valley, nothing severe, just enough to cool the air. Jacob was getting ready for bed when Max suddenly appeared at his front door. That wasn't unusual. The dog often visited, but tonight felt different. Max didn't come inside, didn't ask to play, didn't wag his tail. He simply stood there, looking at Jacob, then looking toward the pasture, then back at Jacob, again and again. "What is it?" Jacob asked. Max immediately stepped outside, then looked back, as if asking him to follow. Jacob grabbed a flashlight and followed the dog. Together they headed toward the southern pasture, where the cattle usually rested at night. Rain continued falling softly. Wind moved through the grass, creating a quiet, rustling sound. After several minutes, Max suddenly accelerated, running toward a low area near the edge of the pasture. Jacob followed, then stopped. A young calf was trapped in a drainage ditch. It had likely slipped while trying to return to the herd. The animal struggled repeatedly, unable to climb out. Jacob looked at Max, immediately understanding why the dog had brought him here. Without help, the calf could have been stranded all night. Jacob went to work. Even with his injured leg, he found a way to pull the calf free. Nearly 20 minutes later, the young animal finally escaped and ran back toward the herd, disappearing into the rain. Jacob stood there, breathing heavily. Mud covered his clothes. But suddenly, he laughed. A real laugh. The first one in a long time. Max ran over, his tail wagging proudly. Jacob knelt beside him, gently stroking his head. "I get it now," he whispered. "I thought I was too old. But maybe I'm still useful." Max gently licked his hand. Jacob looked out across the pasture. For the first time in weeks, He wasn't thinking about selling the ranch. He was thinking about tomorrow and all the work still waiting for him. Autumn arrived in Willow Creek more slowly than usual. The fields turned golden. The maple trees along the dirt roads changed color day by day. The air grew cooler, but somehow more peaceful. Nearly 3 months had passed since the attack. Jacob's injuries had mostly healed. He still walked a little slower, but he could handle most of his work again. More importantly, he was no longer afraid of stepping into the pasture. Every morning, he checked the herd, and every morning, Max appeared, like an official ranch hand, sometimes running ahead, sometimes walking beside him, sometimes resting on a nearby hill, watching everything, but never missing a day. One morning, Walter stopped by the ranch. He found Jacob repairing a gate and laughed. "You don't look retired to me." Jacob rested his hammer. "Maybe I changed my mind." Walter raised an eyebrow. "About selling the herd?" Jacob nodded. "I called the broker." Walter waited and told him not to come. Walter burst out laughing. "Finally came to your senses." Jacob laughed too, but this time there was certainty in his eyes. For weeks, he had been thinking about age, about fear, about the future, and he realized something important. The reason he wanted to sell the ranch wasn't because of his body. It was because of fear. He feared another accident, feared being alone, feared losing control. Then he remembered Max, a dog much smaller than Titan, much weaker than Titan, yet willing to run straight into danger. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because something mattered more than fear: courage and loyalty. Jacob looked at Max resting by the fence and understood. If a dog could be that brave, then so could he. Over the following weeks, the ranch became lively again. Jacob hired a young ranch hand. Walter visited often. Thomas came by every weekend. Slowly, the ranch felt like a family again. One evening in late October, Jacob hosted a simple barbecue. No special occasion, just gratitude. Walter came, Thomas came, Sarah came. Laughter filled the yard, while Max ran around as if he owned the place. As the sun began to set, everyone gathered near the porch. Golden light covered the fields. Jacob stood up, holding a small wooden box. He looked at Max, then at his friends. "I have something to give." He opened the box. Inside was a silver tag, engraved with 2 simple words: "My hero." Walter smiled. Thomas nodded quietly. Sarah wiped away tears. Jacob knelt beside Max and gently attached the tag to his collar. "That day," he said softly, "I thought my life was over." His voice trembled. "But you gave me more time." Max tilted his head, not fully understanding the words, but understanding the love behind them. His tail began wagging. Everyone laughed. The final sunlight slipped beyond the horizon. Autumn wind moved across the fields, carrying the scent of grass, the scent of earth, and peace. Jacob sat beside Max, looking toward the distant hills, no longer thinking about getting old, no longer thinking about the accident, no longer thinking about fear, only the present, his friends, his ranch, and the dog who changed his life. Because sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear uniforms, don't seek recognition. Sometimes they're simply loyal dogs who stay when everyone else leaves and never give up.